The Yakuza, Japan's notorious crime syndicate. And in the experience that I've had with them, I can say without a doubt that those guys are bad news. My name is Justin, your newly appointed gamer detective, and I welcome you back to another episode of the Babble Report. The Yakuza series is by far my favorite series. I played it when it first came out on the PlayStation 2 in its polygon goodness and Mark Hamill Goro Majima English dub. And even to this day, I still love and play the Yakuza games. I own every single game that was released in America. Well, that's a bit of a lie. I don't own every single Yakuza game. I don't own Dead Souls because we don't talk about Dead Souls. Now, imagine my surprise when this case ended up on my desk. A case of stolen identity. Well, allegedly. The culprit in question is a game called Yakuza Fury, which came out around the same time as Yakuza did on the PlayStation 2. But before we get into today's case, I'd like to give a big shout out to 10 Minute Gameplay for allowing us to use his Yakuza Fury game footage. I would highly suggest you check his channel out. The link to his channel will be in the description below. He has a bunch of old games that I think a lot of you guys might enjoy. Now, let's crack this case wide open. What is Yakuza Fury? Well, it came out September 16th, 2005 on the PlayStation 2. It was developed by Ving et Un Systems and published by 505 Games. Now, by thinking, who is Ving et Un Systems? Well, they release classic games such as Zombie Virus, Action Bass, and Splattermaster. The game was made on a budget and it obviously shows. So, what is Yakuza Fury about? What makes it a carbon copy of Yakuza? We start this story off with Kyo Asuka, who joins the Yuto clan, and I apologize if I butchered that, under the leadership of new BFF Gurun Hitoshi, whose boss, Hokuso Ayu, who just united the five rival Yakuza clans under one big peace treaty to end conflict between all of them and dividing their territory evenly amongst the five gangs. Unfortunately, this is one of those gangsters type stories, so peace wasn't an option. Soon after Asuka joined the clan, Bokuso was murdered by a high ranking member of the Nanao clan, and the alliance started to fall apart. And it's up to Asuka and Gurren to try to keep everything together, mend all the bonds, and keep people from falling apart while fighting the as aforementioned Nanao clan. Now, if that story sounded a little too simple, it's because it is. Unlike the Yakuza games that are long depending on which game you're playing, this game can actually be beaten in 3 hours. It's not a very long game, however, it does have a few interesting mechanics that actually gives it a lot of replayability. The game has multiple endings, and depending on how you play it, will determine what ending you get, which is already distanced itself from the Yakuza game. And unlike Yakuza, who focuses on a gangster former ex Yakuza with a heart of gold, in this story, our pro tag is looking to do whatever he can to become number one in the clan. So he has a more emphasis on staying a gangster instead of trying to get out of the life. Now that we got a good summary of the story out of the way, let's go ahead and start looking at the game mechanics and graphics wise. So, from what I've seen and from what I've read, the game has a very slow start but eventually picks up, which isn't something too crazy because that's how some of the Yakuza games start. Nothing really picks up until chapter 3. Speaking of chapters, depending on how you play the game can end at chapter 3. If you do everything right, you can get up to the 10th chapter and an epilogue. Now, you're probably wondering, Why would the game end on chapter 3? What are the multiple endings? How does the game get to that point? Well, that's actually one of the mechanics in the game. See, there is an honor system that is implemented into Yakuza Fury. Now, it's not like a good guy, bad guy honor system. It's more of the Japanese traditional finding somebody with honor. You see, the game gives you weapons and it gives you, melee attacks as any simple beat 'em up games. So, say for instance, you're fighting enemies that are armed. You can beat them up with your fists or find a weapon and beat them up on even grounds. However, if you're beating up an unarmed opponent with a weapon, that gives you bad honor. Gaining bad honor will lead you to an early end in the game, basically the worst ending possible that you can get. However, if you play it smart and fight and use weapons when absolutely necessary, you can achieve one of the more positive endings. Fighting dirty and no honor, that gives you the quickest ending, which is the bad ending. And depending on where your honor is depending on like what ending you'll get. So what you want to aim for is getting the max honor. That will get you the true ending, which is 10 chapters of the game plus an epilogue that shows you 3 years into the future after the story has taken place. This, by the way, is what the game calls the real ending, which I guess is the canon ending. This mechanic alone is what sets itself away from the Yakuza games. However, it still has its fair share of problems. The controls were awkward and the graphics are not the best looking, but the character models and the music was good for 2000 standards. And since this is a Japanese inspired game, it did run into some localization problems. The grammar was iffy and it had poor sentences that weren't worded properly. It was missing words, there was translation mistakes. Some of the titles are confusing, but you can still understand what's going on in the game. And as for the Japanese dub, it was removed entirely. So all you got was something similar to the Ace Attorney series, basically a interactive novel where there was just talking and you get subtitles. That's it. The clothes were very vague or misleading in the descriptions because in the game, different clothes give you different abilities, stat boosts, and different move sets. So certain suits do different things. However, if you wanted to know exactly what your suit did, you'd have to look up a guide because the game was very about what things did, and even starting missions was also a task. You basically had to walk around and beat up punks until you eventually found somebody who gave you a hint on what you were supposed to do next or where you were supposed to go. But the game did add a 60 frame per second option, so I guess the game could run a bit smoother. And there's your basic summary of how the game works, its story, and its mechanics. The game didn't get a sequel, so the next time that you will see Asuka is as a guest character in a game called All Star Fighters, which brings more popular, simpler 2000 games, including the Oni-chan Bata, Global Defense Force, and Demolition Girl characters, all into a crossover fighting game similar to, I guess, for layman's terms, Super Smash Brothers. Now, let's look at all the evidence and solve this case. Is Yakuza Fury a carbon copy of Yakuza? It's not. It's its own game. It has its own thing going on. The only similarities is it's a Yakuza theme game. It's set in Japan, and the main protag wears suits. However, with Asuka, is he can change his clothes later on, so that technically would be a bit of a stretch. Kiryu always wears the same iconic gray suit. So, there you have it. Yakuza Fury. It's his own game. This case has been solved and put in it with all the others. I hope you guys enjoyed today's investigation. I hope everyone's staying safe and healthy. And I will see you guys next mission. Goodbye.
Don't forget to subscribe!